those are the things we're going to be talking about over the next little while. So the 6 tenets are really focused around this idea that all assessment should be for learning, that the assessment is fit for the purpose that you intend, the assessment is built on the standards in your community, so you've been looking at these within your discipline groups or subject areas broadly. And I think we recognise that, you know, a dentist in Turkey should have the same kind of proficiencies as a dentist in Germany or the UK. And certainly, you know, when you're moving towards joining the European Union, you know, your graduates will have that opportunity to work in all of those countries. So they're going to have those similar standards. Integrating assessment literacy into course design, I think, is an interesting topic. So what do we mean by that in terms of how well do our students understand the assessment task that's being set? Okay. So supporting them in understanding what we mean by assessment, what's expected of a different assessment task. That's what we mean by assessment literacy. And then finally, ensuring that professional judgments are valid or reliable. So if I mark a piece of work and give it a first-class honours degree, and you mark a piece of work, would we both agree that this is a first-class piece of work? How do we ensure that those judgments are reliable? So I will provide the link for you in the virtual learning environment to this document. It's a very well-written document, very easy to read and understand. So just then talking about what do we mean by assessment for learning. Okay, so this model was developed by Samble, or was adapted from Samble et al. In 2012 as well. And they identified that for assessment to be for learning, it should have these characteristics. Students are actually developing as learners while they're doing the assessment. There's lots of opportunities for informal feedback. Okay, so if you think about this class here, where I can get through the room, looking at what you're doing and creating your diagrams there, coming around and speaking about, you know, where you're discussing with you your ideas. I'm providing you with informal feedback. What opportunities do you provide for your students to do that? So they're not doing a formal assessment task, but they're doing a task and they're receiving feedback, which is developing their learning behaviours. Formal feedback tends to be kind of linked onto the summative assessment. Opportunities for practice and rehearsal. Okay. So how often do students get opportunities to practice laboratory skills, to practice presentation skills? Obviously then in the arts and things like that, different, I think somebody was speaking yesterday about doing role play activities and practicing those skills. Assessment for learning should be both formative and summative. Okay, so we're going to talk a bit more about what we mean by formative assessment and summative assessment. Right. But essentially, summative assessment is what goes forward to the mark, and then formative assessment is all the things that you do during the course of your courses that don't actually contribute to the mark, but perhaps small quizzes within the class that don't contribute finally. But all of these things should still be driving learning forward. And finally, assessment should be authentic. So when we look at assessment tasks that we set, like multiple choice questions, like essay writing, that students are never ever going to do again once they leave university. Okay, so those are not authentic learning. Okay, so we'll talk a bit more about that, but basically making sure that our assessment reflects the kind of things that they're going to be doing when they leave university. Because unless you're going into academia, you probably would never write another essay again. Certainly would never write multiple choice answers to anything. So that's the basic model. Just then reiterating the difference between summative assessment and formative assessment. So summative counts towards the marks or the grades, essentially. And formative allows students to practice the types of things that perhaps they might be doing in their summative assessment, get constructive feedback, and they can understand where they need to improve. They can also develop their assessment literacy through formative assessment. So assessment for learning, so there's this kind of sort of thermostat model, so that as they do the assessment, you know, they're getting feedback all the time on their learning. Okay, so do we have any engineers in the room? Yeah, so we understand the kind of the feedback loop, you know, and we can moderate our behaviour so we make sure that we're staying on track. And I think it's a useful analogy to think about when you're giving student feedback, how is that helping them develop their learning? Okay, how is that helping them stay on track? Okay, so if they're going off in a wrong direction, you know, maybe a failing direction, is your feedback getting them back on track, back into the zone that they want to be, or is it actually not helping them at all? They're just going to carry on in that kind of failing trajectory. So you can think about that thermostat model in that way, making sure that your feedback is getting them back into that kind of passing, successful area. So the assessment for learning model, it's really a kind of shift away from this idea that all assessment is just testing, evaluating of learning. Okay, so you know you've done this course of study, and you know, yes, I can now say yes, you're accredited, you have this knowledge, and you're moving forward. Okay, so it's really moving away from that. And I suppose you can have this idea that if your students got all the way up to the door of the exam room, you know, at the end of their degree programme and they're taking their final exams, and they didn't actually step through the door and take the exams, you know, are they still, you know, do they still have all that knowledge, skill and behaviours that you want them to develop? Okay, so that kind of stepping through the door and taking the exam is just that kind of tick box, yes, you've done that. Okay, you're not going to do any more learning in that exam room. Okay, but if the assessments going through the programme are much more for their learning, they're going to learn through those assessments. Does that make sense? Yeah. But if you stop them going through the door, they wouldn't gain any further knowledge or understanding by going through the door and taking the exam. Yeah. I proposed that argument to my son when he was doing his final school exams in the summer, and he's taken an additional course in further maths, and he come home and one exam had been a complete disaster. And I was about to say, well, but you know, you actually understand all this stuff, and it's going to be really valuable when you do your degree, even if the exam didn't go so well. You know this stuff. But I think I might have got the textbook thrown at me, so I didn't bother kind of giving that example. But it's that idea that if you've done all the learning, just because you may not perform well in the exam because you're sick or you have a bad day, you know, you still actually know all that knowledge. So it's kind of, does all our assessment before that promote learning? So the key principle here is that all assessment, even your summative assessment, and I think this is where we don't do it very well, should contribute to helping students learn and succeed. And it bases around a much more holistic approach. So when you're looking at your maps, there's your assessment. Try to develop your assessment so it touches all areas of those circles. It's not just, okay, now I'm only assessing knowledge, now I'm assessing skills, but designing assessments that can be much more holistic. So, that's kind of just reiterating what I've already said, that we should place much more emphasis on driving assessment for learning. So assessment for learning, then, if you're breaking that down further, means that tasks should be authentic, engaging and meaningful. Okay, should be about developing students as learners. Again, looking at those attributes and professional values that you've already identified, how can we get those into the assessment? Opportunities for informal feedback, whether that's feedback from their peers or feedback from tutors or facilitators. And more formal feedback, but happening regularly and focused. I think providing feedback, this is something that's a real challenge, certainly in the UK sector at the moment. And every university I go to visit, they say, we produce all this feedback and the students don't read it or they don't act on it, and they give us really bad, all our students rate their courses, and one of the big criteria is assessment of feedback, and it's one that traditionally many courses do very badly at. You know, they get very poor scores for assessment of feedback. So there's kind of this disconnect between how you're communicating that feedback to your students and how they're understanding it. Okay. think it's useful to think about when you've received feedback on something. On the in-between modules activities, you're going to get feedback from your peers on your presentation, on your teaching. And I think it's really useful, as well as obviously taking on board what they're saying to you. But how does that feedback make you feel? If it's constructive, if it's negative, if it kind of focuses on all the bad points. So if you give your lecture and your group come up to you and say, okay, yeah, I sat through your lecture. Right, first of all, your slides were rubbish. Secondly, I couldn't hear you. Thirdly, and so if you fix all those for next time, you'll be fine. Oh, and it was quite interesting. Yeah, well done. How's that going to make you feel? You're like, oh, great. And I think we can tend to do that with our students. We can be overcritical. No, you need to fix this, you need to fix that, and give them like 10 things they need to fix, and they can be overwhelmed. Whereas actually that formative feedback, really focusing on perhaps one or two elements that can be enhanced, but of course also giving constructive and positive feedback. So I think feedback is a huge area that we can spend the whole day talking about, but it's certainly something we're going to explore when you're giving feedback to each other and in more detail. We've already mentioned these ones. Practicing, giving opportunities for practice and rehearsal, and balancing both formative and summative assessment. So authentic assessment, what do we mean by that? As I said before, the types of tasks that people will be expected to do when they go into the real world. So the problem-based learning tasks, where you're given a kind of perhaps not very well defined, quite a messy problem to solve. If you're out in industry or if you're out in business, you're not going to be given a very well-defined problem. Go and calculate X, Y, and Z. You're going to be given, a very messy kind of situation or case or scenario, and you have to actually find out what the problem is before you move on. There should be complex assessment tasks. So. The more complex the task, the more likely you are going to touch on all areas of your service. It's important that you get. I think they become much more engaging and meaningful if you start to get problems or assessment tasks from the real world, and certainly liaising and working with employers to develop problems for your students to solve can make them incredibly engaging and meaningful. And also original. I suppose globally, there's one of the kind of downsides of the internet and the readily available information is that it's very easy for students to plagiarise, copy, go to essay mills to get answers for their assignments or to buy assignments. But the more original and challenging the assignment you set, the harder it is for them to find that stuff. Okay? And certainly the essay mill people, they like the kind of the bulk standard essays that you can just deliver off the shelf. Do you understand the term essay mills? Is that familiar to you? No? Where students can buy essays, so they just send their... Yeah, so you understand the concept, but not that terminology. So what do you call them? Just...
There are some websites.
Yes. Yeah.
You tell them the topic,
yeah.
And they write the essay for you, and you just pay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's increasingly it's becoming a huge problem. I've seen some of them that come out of these essay mills, and they're not great. So, but the more original and challenging the assignment, the harder it is for students to find people to write those for them. Reflecting real-world activities and therefore developing your graduates' employability. I think all of those things just link together. Okay. So does anybody want to comment on this idea of developing authentic assessments? How many of you feel that all of your assessments are truly authentic? Some of your assessments are authentic. Yeah, some are.
Yes. For example, the graduation project.
Yes. Yes.
They find the topic related with the employment opportunities, and we evaluate it step by step. So in for example, every 2 weeks, I check their improvements and then feedback, and then they change their.
Yes. Yeah, so those sort of capstone projects, those research projects that students are doing in their final year, kind of start to hit these things here. But we should be able to take small elements of that and build that all the way through. So it's not suddenly in their final year, they're kind of exposed to these problems, but they get a taster of it as they progress through the course so that they can then develop those skills rather than suddenly, you know, assessment's gone from this very structured, small task to this sort of massive project without any stepping stones in between. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in education we have such thing, a continuous system of our design studio system, and the way we assess the products, the project is that kind of an evaluation. It's quite comprehensive, taking these issues into consideration. So from the very first day to the end of the education.
Yeah. So it's scaffolded all.
This,
it's scaffolded all the way through the program. So I think you know that's the approach to go.